Hey y'all, now that we've started to make our March distilling moonshine, or new make, or white lightning, or, we keep running into the question, what exactly is moonshine? And what makes a good one? Or in general, what is the history of it? So because we're making moonshine over in Europe, in Switzerland to be exact, a lot of people do not know the answer to this question. So I thought, let's make a short video and answer it for everybody. Moonshine theoretically only came around during Prohibition. This was the time where in the US you were not allowed to produce or sell alcohol unless you had a particular license. And to have this license, you were a pretty big distillery already, and you were producing enough whiskey for medical purposes. Now, what happened during this time is, and there's a lot of folklore and different things going, or reasons to why this may or may not be true, but the concept is we have been distilling. As humanity, we've been distilling and making beer for a long time. And that doesn't mean that we've had laws regulating it or taxes we've been paying on it. Yeah, these things have and have not been around. But the difference is, it used to be that anybody could produce it. Way back when it was originally founded, it used to be that any farmer would take whatever spirit, whatever product they had too much of. In the US, for instance, it's corn and rye. It could be barley somewhere else. It could be actually a non-whiskey based product, and could be grappa or brandy, whatever the farmer had too much of. Rather than letting it sit down and go bad, they would distill it and make something like this, a clear, see-through product. And this would be called new make, or just the spirit in general. Now, during Prohibition, when that was made illegal, and the farmer who was just farming so nothing would get thrown away, suddenly produced at night. And why did they produce at night? Because the stills that they were using, something similar to this guy here, were, well, they were powered by heat. So you were heating up the tub down here, and that was making smoke. And that meant that if you were doing it at night, it might not be so visible. The smoke, at least, of the fire coming up would not be as visible as the surroundings. So as the, let's say, the smoke coming up in the morning. So that's why it was called moonshine, because you could create this spirit, this white, new make, unaged spirit at night under the shining moonlight. Now, until then, it was just product, it was just spirit. And even there's a big brandy history, and different types of schnapps were created in the US by people which had migrated over. But the term moonshiners took off in the 1920s, especially on the East Coast and in the mountains, where you could hide a little bit better. And not to mention, you've got the TV show The Moonshiners, which I'm shocked to see and hear that so many people have seen it and really like it. And some of those people which are attendees on those shows, they are distillers. They have a distilling license and a distillery. And although they're making something we're going to call moonshine, it's actually a legal spirit. And traditionally, moonshine was not. Now, at the same time, you have people on that show which are legitimate moonshiners, and I have no idea how they get out and are not instantly arrested, but somehow it's happening. And that's quite impressive to see. Although moonshining theoretically started in 1920 with the start of Prohibition, it actually kept going on until in 1933, especially in the Appalachian Mountains. Appalachian Mountains. But once it became legal again and you were able to produce your own whiskey and your own products, the style and the name moonshine has stuck around and is something like a heritage, or like a, I don't want to say traditional drink, but I mean, bourbon is probably more and traditional whiskey is more, but it is something that still has a lot of following and brings back memories, as well as a tradition and a different time in the US when simply drinking a little bit of an alcoholic beverage was not so easy to do. Now, why is it loved? Probably the history, probably the idea and the American spirit around not being strapped down to a law or a legal requirement, but doing what is in your rights to do and your ability to do. Now, of course, there's dangerous aspects of distilling, but if you know what you're doing and doing a little bit of research and being relatively careful, but in the US, that idea and that let's say that feeling of, hey, this is what it has to be and this is my freedom and my right is definitely there. So moonshining and distilling is still 100% a thing. Now, what are the flavors of moonshine? Moonshine, when it is in its white, distilled but non-aged or not additionally flavored version, is relatively grainy, and sometimes depending on what your base grain is. For instance, this one here is a I don't want to say bourbon, but it's a corn moonshine. You get a little bit of sweetness in this, and then you also get, of course, very dry, almost like you're walking by a grain field and the wind blows by and you suddenly get a little bit of that dry, itchy throat. It's similar to that, or I taste a little bit of that in this. Now, the malted rye, which is used in the F.L.F, is actually quite different. Here, you get a very, I almost want to say fruity or grapey experience. And that's because the malted rye, being the predominant grain in that product, gives you a much different experience and way different flavors. There is a little bit of corn in this bottle too, but it's not enough to really play a huge influence. If anything, a little bit of the sweetness is contributed by that corn. Now, this isn't the only type of moonshine out there. Of course, you have things like this, and this is what you might see a lot of on TV, and you might even find some products like this out on the shelves at different locations and stores. This is, or was, actually the same moonshine that I have in this bottle, but as you can see here, with a piece of wood inside. Now, why do we do this? Why do we add fruits? Sometimes there's apples in there, sometimes there's different brandies. Well, it makes it a little bit more palatable, a little bit more tasteful, and a lot more, easy to drink, let's say it like that. In many cases, especially traditionally, moonshine was just kind of whatever you made. And of course, there's people who did an amazing job at it, but some people which were just making it at huge volumes and quantities just to sell it. And what they probably realized is nobody will buy it. No one likes the taste. So what did they do? They started to add different types of things to it. They tried to rectify it by adding sugar, by adding wood influences, probably not a lot of wood, but more fruits and other things. Now this raises the question, is moonshine dangerous? Can you go blind from it? Well, if you're buying it from a very cheap producer way back when, maybe, but not because the product is dangerous. The product is the same whiskey. What makes it dangerous is when the still is running and as you are losing or a little bit of fluid is coming off of it and into your catching material or your glass, whatever, the first piece of what comes out of the still is the heads. And that is not particularly, I don't want to say it's dangerous if you just drink it straight out like that. It comes out, you fill a glass and you take that as a shot all at once. That is of course dangerous. But if you let that all get collected, at the end you have a couple liters or hundreds of liters, whatever your size is, that gets diluted. And at no point when you are distilling something are you adding anything. If anything, you are taking away. Okay, now maybe the copper is adding or changing some things, but we're not adding any harmful chemicals in the distilling process. What's happening is those are just becoming stronger. For instance, a beer, wine, or even apple juice has more of these harmful chemicals and methanol in it than your traditional whiskey does. So, what does that mean? Some of these cheap rectifiers or the cheaper, let's say, individuals trying to produce a product to sell under the name of moonshine or whiskey were adding different chemicals, which were white, see-through, but, well, maybe not the healthiest to consume. Maybe it was industrial grade, whatever. Who knows? Because if you've ever tried to water down any moonshine or any, let's say, white-based spirit and you just add regular water to it, the mineral in the water starts to fog up. Or even if you take whiskey and you add too much water to it at the distilling process, it starts to lose a little bit of its clarity. And a good buyer of whiskey would be able to look at that and say, yeah, this isn't pure. Hence the term proof, but that's a different story for later. What I find very interesting about moonshine, coming from a distillery which is just getting started and only has some whiskey in barrels, having the ability to express what the whiskey tastes like without the wood influence is a very amazing thing for me, because for me this is the A product that goes into the barrel to then later become the B product and hopefully become even better and become more likable and enjoyable in that process. But for some, it's interesting to know what the whiskey tastes like at the first stage and what flavors we're trying to enhance or make better, or simply being able to compare this and having a better understanding of, okay, this is what wood does to a whiskey. This is what, in my case, brand new, unused American white oak does to some whiskey. Or moonshine. So, hope you learned a little bit about moonshine. I hope you try it, and one day, if anyone ever offers you some in the US or anywhere in the world, don't be worried. It's probably not going to make you blind. And if so, I mean, you can probably sniff it and know right before you even take the sip, but give it a shot. See what the distiller is trying to express and see what the whiskey tastes like. Remember, it's just grain, what it tastes and smells like before the influence of wood and time. Hey guys, cheers to you and your next glass of whiskey. I have a bottle, so I guess I gotta pop this open and give it a shot. Get it? Shot.